Welcome to Stories to Inspire. When a young couple is expecting their first child, it is normally a joyous occasion. But for one young couple, that was hardly the case. Pastor Adam Zamora and his wife Elizabeth went to visit their local OBGYN and were faced with some tough news. Their daughter, that they were carrying for 3 months, had Potter's syndrome. Potter's syndrome occurs in the womb, and the baby doesn't develop kidneys or a bladder. Thousands of miles away from friends and family, what would this young couple do?
After the doctor gave us the news, the doctor said, let's just go ahead and abort the baby right now. And I didn't ask my wife, but I knew what my wife felt, and I said, Doctor, there's no way we're going to abort the baby. If God wants to take the baby, He can take the baby. We're Christians. We have confidence and believe in a sovereign God and that He is in control and allows things to happen in our lives. And He's also able to do anything that He would please. And so when I said that statement, the doctor got pretty vitriolic with us, and as if we were naive and basically stupid. And said, well, you know what, you can go see another doctor because I don't want to see you anymore. And so 2 weeks later, we went back to the Pomona Valley Hospital after receiving the news, and prayerful and hopeful. And the doctor did tell us as well, the first doctor, that my wife also had a condition called placentia previa, where the uterus and the placentia were pulling away from one another, and that she ran the risk of hemorrhaging if she went through with the pregnancy, and even hemorrhaging pre-labor as well. And so when we saw the second doctor, we were hoping for better news, and we did some testing as we did the week before. The doctor had us go to lunch and drink lots of fluids, and my wife did exactly that. We went to lunch and we came back, and the doctor basically gave the same prognosis. There's Potter's syndrome, there's no kidneys, no blood movement in the area where the kidneys and the bladder are, and there's no amniotic fluid, which would also take place if there was no kidneys and bladder, the amniotic fluid being the fluid that is produced from basically the bladder, the urine, which is what is the fluid that the baby is in when the baby's in the uterus. And she said the baby has no kidneys, no bladder, but we can always hope and pray for the best. And basically gave us no chance that our daughter, who we found out at the time it was a daughter, that our daughter would make it. So that was kind of the picture. The picture was bleak. And while we had seen the specialist, my wife was still seeing the regular OBGYN doctor. And the first specialist we thought was vitriolic. Well, our OBGYN doctor was very adamant that we shouldn't have went forward with the pregnancy. Our prayer was that God's will would be done, most importantly, because we knew that whatever God's will was, that was going to be the most important thing for us. We knew and we know that He works all things together for good to them who love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. And we knew that whatever God was doing in our lives, He would work those things together for His good. And even though we may not see all the goodness in the moment, we knew it would ultimately work together for our good. And this was all happening while my wife and I were attempting to start a church. Or actually, she was still trying to help whatever she could, but she was basically on bed rest, and we were trying to start a church about 3,000 miles away from our family, her family and mine. I got in with this high-risk pregnancy doctor named Dr. Jerry Yu, and he understood what the prognosis was and did his own set of examinations and understood how we felt that we were going to keep the baby. And And so he just instructed all the doctors to just care for my wife the best that they could, and whatever would happen would happen. And so Dr. Yu had told us that if the baby did live, and so did all the other doctors down the line, had said if the baby did live, that the baby would have all kinds of problems because there was no amniotic fluid. The doctor said that the baby would not form properly. The amniotic fluid helps the limbs and the arms and the facial features in the body to form, I guess, adequately. And the doctor also said that if there was no amniotic fluid, that the lungs would be one solid mass. The amniotic fluid helps the lungs to become porous and so on. And basically said that when the umbilical cord was cut, that the baby, once the baby was born, would die. And then as the doctor was looking at the baby in the womb, he had a tear run down his eye, and he said, "This baby has something seriously wrong with it." We were thinking, the doctors, all the doctors have said anything that could be wrong with this child was going to be wrong. And so we said, "Well, what's wrong with the baby?" And he said, "This baby has a full bladder." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, wait a minute, Doc. A baby can't have a full bladder unless it has some kidneys." And he says, "Yes, I know." and tears started coming down his eyes, and he says, "If this baby lives, I'll have a wonderful story to tell." We always knew that God was able, and we were always hopeful that God would allow the child to live. But even at that point, the doctor gave us less than 5% chance that our baby would live. But it had some, and it really started at that 7-month period time. In fact, when we were looking at Victoria in that ultrasound at 7 months, the doctor saw the baby expel her bladder on the ultrasound, and it was the first time that we knew of that there was any amniotic fluid in the womb. And so there on that Sunday, the water broke, and I rushed my wife to the hospital, and we're waiting and waiting, and I thought to myself, oh no, I didn't bring a camera. I didn't have time, I didn't think, to go back to our home and to get a camera, so I wanted to go to a Walmart to get a camera, because the doctors did say that 5% chance of the baby living, and that if the baby did live, it would only live for a few moments. And I wanted to make sure I had some film of our baby living, if at all possible. Went in and they delivered the baby by cesarean. They pulled her out, and she was all gummed up, as babies are when they come out of the womb, and they cut the cord, and there was some nervous moments for sure as the baby was screaming, and we thought the screams could possibly wane and diminish and so on, but the screams continued to go on, and they continued to go on, and they continued to go on.
It was just amazing. I remember my husband and I looking at one another, and we're just overjoyed. What an experience it is any time to bring a child into this world, but through the circumstances that we had, it was just amazing to get to hear that little cry in the delivery room. And still, it was some scary days, not knowing how she would be. She was just 3 pounds 6 ounces when she was born.
I had one last payment I needed to pay to the doctor that was in Rancho Cucamonga, who was our OBGYN doctor. And we had not seen her for a couple of months, and she probably wondered what had happened to us and what had happened in the situation. Well, as the nurses said the name Zamora, the doctor was put in tune that we were there. She asked my wife to come in the back, and she wanted to talk to her. Obviously, she didn't meet people like us very often. In fact, when we were there and I challenged her about her whole position about life, she had told us that at the time we were the only ones that ever refused to get an abortion when she advised. Our little baby, Victoria, whom, by the way, we named her Victoria because God gave victory in the situation, and Brooke, we named her because my wife liked the name, and I like to say God caused those kidneys and those bladders to flow like a brook. Anyways, the doctor looked at my wife, she looked at me, she looked at Victoria, and then she said, "Who's this?" And I looked at her and I said, "Dr. Sura, this is our baby Victoria. This is our little girl who you so adamantly opposed us choosing life for. This is the little girl who you told us to abort." And she looked at me, and she was pregnant at the time herself, and she was a Hindu lady, and she said, "Next time I run into trouble, I'm not going to pray to my gods, I'm going to pray to your God." It was a start. If our child did live, she would be a testimony to those unbelieving doctors that were so adamant about our baby being aborted. And I'll say this, I'm glad we chose life. I can't imagine our lives without Victoria.